Thank you. I'm going to take it out of there because I move around a bit, I'm afraid. Due to hyperactivity ever since I was a child, I've always done this. A friend of mine said to me yesterday, why Lucy Air Ambulance? Why would you want to be patron of Lucy Air Ambulance? And my answer to that is this. When I was born, not long after, a week or two, I had bronchial pneumonia. So in actual fact, I shouldn't be here. I was given a 10% chance of living. For some reason, God looked at me and thought, well, you better carry on living. So I did, and that's the reason I'm here. I didn't need Lucy Air Ambulance. They wouldn't have been around then anyway. But there are many, many children today that do, and we're all here today to support that cause. So I think it's been fantastic, and I hope the raffle raises a lot of money for the charity. Sorry, I'll just go on. From there, my life was going to go uphill, I thought, but actually it went downhill. When I was 4.5, my mother and father, it was always a very acrimonious marriage. We lived in a council house in Bristol. My mum and dad, it was a very difficult relationship, often violent. And when I was 4.5, I went downstairs one day to find that my mum was no longer there. So I was just there now in a council house on what was a very rough council estate then and is even now. And my dad was in his 50s when I was born. He had no idea how to deal with a young, hyperactive monster like me. And so it was a very, very difficult period. I didn't realise at the time that my mother, in fact, had a breakdown, and I didn't see her again for about 18 months. And when I was reunited, she'd gone to live in a touring caravan in Wiltshire that was in the middle of a field. We never had a car, so we never toured anywhere. The caravan, we just lived in it. So I lived between there and what was then a one-bed council flat in Bristol with my dad until later on, my mum made it to a prefab when I was about 10, and we lived then in the prefab. So that was the beginning of my life, and which is why I identify with kids that are in difficult situations today, because it isn't easy. I was lucky. My mum and dad individually both loved me. They had no idea how to deal with me as a child, but they did love me. I never felt unloved. I just felt a bit isolated. And my hyperactivity meant that I did things that other kids of my age didn't do. My son's in the audience, and he would tell you in our family, it's a bit of legend in our family, because I first ran away from home when I was 2.5. And I was gone for 18 hours. And it was then that I discovered the ability to blend. And what I mean by that was that, and I never tell this story when I'm in audiences of children. So none of you look that, you all look very young, but you don't look that young. So what I used to do, and I'd learnt this by accident when I was 2.5, I'd go to a bus stop and I'd wait for families. And in those days, lots of people, working class kids, families like mine anyway, never thought about cars. We would get the bus. And I would go to a bus stop and I would wait for families to be waiting on the bus stop, and I'd blend in with the other kids. And this person would think I was with the other family and so on. No one took any notice. We'd all get on the bus. And that's what happened to me when I was 2.5, which is why I ended up being found in a bush 18 hours later at a park, because I'd blended in with all these kids, got off the bus, no one had noticed, and I'd gone playing with other kids in this park, and there I was found 18 hours after. So I learnt this. So I would frequently during my life go around, and I'd go to a bus stop, and after that I learnt you could do it on trains also. And I'd wait till families would queuing up, and then I'd get... And I told this story, and this isn't name dropping by the way, but I told this story to the Duke of Edinburgh when I had lunch. We were sitting next to each other, and basically what had happened is, it was the first time I'd ever visited Buckingham Palace. And he was a bit puzzled, and the reason for this, of course, wasn't anything to do with meeting the Queen. What it was, I wanted to go to London because I wanted a German Shepherd. And that sounds a bit odd, but I wanted this German Shepherd. And I'd read that the Queen had corgis, and I thought, well, their ears are the same shape. And she's not going to lie to me. So I was 7, and I managed to get on a train at Bristol Temple Meads by doing my blending trick. And I ended up at Paddington, and I walked somehow, found my way to Buckingham Palace, and I walked up and down and outside wondering how I would see the Queen. And a policeman early on just thought I was with various families, but later on realised that I was this scruffy, skinny kid with curly hair, and I wasn't really with anyone, and the call went out and I was taken by police car from Buckingham Palace back to Bristol. My dad wasn't really very happy at the time, but anyway, nonetheless, that was it. I managed to get there. So so that's how it sort of started for me. And then when I was 14, I never used to. One of the problems I had is because my mum lived in Malmesbury in Wiltshire, on the edge of the Cotswolds, in this touring caravan. My dad lived in the council flat that I've mentioned. Because of the difference there of educational authorities, no one really knew where I was at any given time. And my mum and dad never spoke for the rest of their lives. Even 32 years after, when I had them both come to my house for Christmas, I had to have one in one room and one in the other because they didn't like each other so much. And we had a real problem serving Christmas lunch, I can tell you. But anyway, but I did it because I felt they wouldn't live forever and we needed to do it. And I wanted them to understand each other a bit, which in a way they did. So there I was, and that was the way I was. So I didn't used to go to school. I used to use this idea that I didn't need to go to school. Why do I want to go to school? Because I was always the odd kid out because I was never at school. So there were cliques in schools. You know, when you go into somewhere and suddenly it's all a clique and you're not part of that. So I didn't like it, but I had one salvation, and that was that when I was growing up, right from when I almost opened my eyes, my mum was taught me to read. She was an avid reader of paperback fiction. She never read anything serious, but she did read paperback fiction. So she taught me to read by what was then sort of the books of the day, you know, Mills and Boon type stuff. But I was three and a half. And so by the time I was sort of 4 or 5, I had a reading age of 11 or 12, so they said. So I always was able to access information, and I used to use the libraries, which is really one of the reasons why I ended up as ambassador at the British Library and also on the first official entrepreneur in residence at the British Library, which I resigned from last year for other commitments. But the important thing for me was the ability to read. So when I wanted to access information as a child of 5 or 6 or 7, I would go to a library and get a book. So whatever it was I needed to know, I felt the libraries there'd be a book somewhere. So my mum's new husband, later on she got married again, he was a very nice and kind man, but had been a farm labourer, couldn't really read or write very well, never read anything. My mum would read, but she read library books, mostly, and paperback fiction still. And my dad only read newspapers. So in Bristol, I had 4 tickets for the library from my dad, 4 tickets of my own, 4 tickets in Malmesbury from Ray, my mum's husband, and 4 tickets of my own, because they were different authorities. So I would travel everywhere with 16 books, which is why I learnt the power of taking everything on a set of wheels. And it must have been quite odd for a kid to be looking at all these books, but I did. So if I wanted to know anything, I'd get a book. So but I could never ever be like normal kids. I couldn't have this situation where I could have a paper round. I wanted a paper round. I wanted just to be normal and have a paper round, but I couldn't have a paper round. And last year, I was sitting next to a director at W.H. Smith, and I said, well, you know, you were the first people that ever employed me. And she said, how did we employ you? And I said, well, I really wanted this paper round, but I could never get one because I was never in one place long enough, you see. I was either off on my travels by blending, or I was at my mum's or my dad's. So what I did, I'd go to a newsagent at 20 to 6 in the morning when they were putting the papers up, wherever I happened to be. And I'd go to the newsagents and say, especially in November, December, January, have you got anyone that hasn't turned up? And they would always say, yeah, I've got 2 people who haven't turned up. Why? I said, well, I'll do the rounds. I haven't got school today. Well, because I never used to go. And they'd say, oh, that's great, yeah, would you do a round? I said, well, how many have you got? We've got 2 rounds or 3. I said, I'll do them all. And they'd say, this is fantastic, thanks. And I said, that's great. If you give me the addresses. And W.H. Smiths were the first one because they used to give their paper boys a paper bike. And I never had a bike. So I thought they got a paper bike, that W.H. Smith, so I can get a company bike. And I got that bike for free. So what I did, I said, well, if you give me the bike, I'll do the paper rounds. I used to use their bike for other newsagents as well, but they never realised that. I had their history department ask me about it just recently. And so what I used to do is go and get this, I'd get this bike and I'd say, so they would first of all say, yes, great. And I'd say, well, how much do you pay? And they'd say, oh, it's X. And I'd say, yeah, no, I charge 3 times that. And they'd say, no, you don't understand. That's the rate? And I'd say, yeah, but that's for somebody that isn't here. I am here. And it's raining. My rate's 3 times that. And they say, no, that's all right. I say, that's fine. I walk down the street. And that's when I learnt the power of the ability to walk away. If the deal won't stack up, walk away. And that's where I first learnt that, and it's held me in reasonably good stead. I walked away from quite a few, and it's as important to walk away as it is to do them, I think. You know, leave the door open for the deal that's worth doing, not be cluttered up with stuff that won't work. And so I would, and they invariably chased me down the road, and there was one guy at WH Smith called Peter, and he used to chase me down the road quite often and say, no, can we negotiate? And I used to have all this money because I was getting 3 times the rate. And so I used to think this is quite good because 2 days is like 6 or 7 or 8 days work, whatever I negotiated. So I used to do that. And then when I got to 14, and I won't talk for too long because I know we're running out of time, but when I got to 14, I used to deliver newspapers, like the way I'm saying, and I used to deliver the Financial Times to this was quoted in the Daily Express and other papers as being a rich banker. Actually, he was a local bank manager for Lloyds Bank. And he was a nice guy, lived in a nice semi-detached house, but he wasn't a rich banker. But anyway, nonetheless, he was a very able banker, and he wanted a koi carp pond or a goldfish pond built in his house. And I used to I'd started this gardening thing as well as the paper round. And I knew that he wanted this pond. So I used to deliver the FT to him, and I'd read in the FT that this was 1968, and I was 14 at the time. I would have been 15 in the August, and it was 1968, as I say. And I was reading in the FT because I used to read the papers en route. So I read nearly every newspaper all the time. And even today, we have a newspaper researcher in our business, and she works full-time for us, reviewing all the world's newspapers, taking cuttings, and giving us information on world events for hotspotting, for investment. It's one of the things that we do. So I'm delivering this FT, so I'm reading it, and in there it said, if Britain joins the EU, well, EEC, Common Market as it was then, we're all going to have to clean big industrial food manufacturers are going to have to clean their ovens more often because the Brits don't do it enough. It didn't quite say that, but it was more or less that. So I thought, I didn't think much more of it. Well, I used to read I've delivered the paper, went on my way. I used to read another paper called The Exchange and Mart, and I don't know whether any of you remember it. But you used to get everything in the Exchange and Mart. You could buy cats, and that's where I first got the idea for a German Shepherd, was in there. And you'd read this and think, I used to read this. I used to read it in my office because I had a brilliant office. In my dad's council flat, we had a bathroom with a 150-watt bulb in it because my dad's eyesight wasn't that good. And it was really nice and bright, so I could go and sit there for hours with the Exchange and Mart, especially when my dad was out. And I would read through it. And I was reading the Exchange and Mart the same day, really by not going to school, basically. And I was reading it. There was a cartoon in there, and it was a lady spraying a fluid from an aerosol onto a domestic oven, and it said, clean your oven whilst it's hot. And the big thing about the FT article was that they were saying that there's a lot of downtime involved with all the Hovises and Wolves and people having to shut ovens down to do this special cleaning on a regular basis. It was going to cost a fortune in manufacturing time. So I thought, well, surely if you can clean an oven, a domestic oven when it's hot with this fluid, you can clean a commercial oven. You just might need more fluid. So I thought, that's good. And there was a number on the bottom of the advert, no address, but a number, and it was a cartoon. And so I thought, well, we never had a phone. We never had a phone, we never had a car, we never had a carpet. My dad never owned a fridge. We never had any of those things. Later on, I did get my dad a carpet for his flat, but so we didn't have any of that. So I thought, I've got to go and do this. So there was a phone box, and this is, I suppose, what Steve was alluding to, but this name, the Phone Box Millionaire, which is stuck because of that. I thought, well, I'll go to the end of the street and I'll use that phone box, but I didn't know how to use it. I had no idea. I'd never used a phone. So I went to the phone box, And I looked at it and I thought, right, it says dial 100 for the operator. And it was in the days when the new phone system had come in. And you'd ring so I rang the operator and said, how do I use this phone? And we got chatting. And she said, on the phone, she didn't know I was 14. I said, I need to ring this number. And she said, what's the number? So I gave her the number. And she said, that's a number in the United States. And I'm a kid on a council estate. I'd never used a phone. We didn't have anything. I'd never even been to school, apart from reading lots of books. And she said, it's in the United States. It's going to cost you a lot of money to ring that number. So I said, well, no, I need to ring that number. Definitely. How do I go about it? And she said, well, you get the money if you get enough coins put in, and I can put you through on the STD system to the States. And I said, right, okay, how much do I need? So she told me, and I said, right. So I always had some money. So I went to a supermarket called Lipton's, which was close by, with these 10 bob notes. In those days, my son won't remember 10 bob notes, but I went with a 10 bob note, and I go with this money to get it changed. Got it changed in the coins. Go back to the phone box. Well, there was she told me that her name was Joyce Thompson, and she said when you come back, ring the exchange, same number. It'll come through to me at Thornbury, and I will be able to put you through, and they'll come and get me. So I go back. I go into the phone box. I dial 100. It goes off. I get through to Joyce. Oh, I don't. I get through to someone else, and I said, "Is Joyce there?" Which is why she'd given me her name so they could get her. She came to the phone, and I said, I've got the money. Well, she wasn't expecting anybody to come back to the phone. She didn't know that I was 14, but she still wasn't expecting this person to come back to the phone. So she said, yeah, you can do this. So she said, what you do, I can ring it, and when I tell you, put the coins in. So I said, I can't do that. If I do that, I'm supposed to be a business in Bristol. I can't put the coins in. They're going to hear at the other end. They're going to hear the coins dropping. And she said, oh, we can get over that. What I can do then is if you wait, you put the coins in, and what I can do, I can make the line open, and I'll ring the number for you, and when they answer the phone, they'll just think I'm your secretary. And that's exactly what we did. And I got this guy who became friends for a very long time, Barry and his brother in New Jersey, and he said to me years later, he said, I never knew you were a kid. So I basically, I put the phone, I got through, and Barry answered the phone, and I said, can you give me, you got this advert? And he said, yeah. I said, you're looking for agents in the UK? Yeah. I said, well, if you send me the formula over, and bear in mind, this wasn't emails, this is sort of pigeon stuff, airmail, and if you send me the formula, I'll get it made up in the UK. And he said, what, you think I'm going to send you my formula for my fluid? And I said, well, yeah, how else are we going to do it? You're not going to ship fluid, are you? It's going to cost a lot of fortune. I might as well make it here in my factory. Well, I have to tell you, that my factory turned out to be a whole group of sheds that were derelict because of vandals. And I just got lots of the local kids, and one guy who at the time was 71, and he was a forklift truck driver, had retired from Avonmouth Docks as the foreman, and they ended up being my factory in the end. But at the time, I didn't even have that. And I said, I'll make the fluid, I'll make it up. And he said, no way, I'm not going to send you the... I said, okay, well, I'll give you another ring, have a chat about it again. And I thought I was pushing it a bit too much, put the phone down. And then I thought, God, this is going to cost a fortune ringing that bloke every week to go. I was determined to get this fluid. And it wasn't to sell it to the big oven makers. What I thought was I can flog it around the doors, because I had another business at the time that was manufacturing pictures. And I used to buy a book from W.H. Smith that it used to cost me 2 and 6 with 49 paint by numbers. Do you remember that, paint by number? And I could get these paint by numbers picture book, 49 pictures in there. And what I used to do, I was hopeless because I was so hyperactive. I wanted to colouring in really quick. It was no good for me, but I knew 2 girls on the estate where I lived, and they were brilliant colouringers. And so I got them to do the colouring in, and that's where I learned it's always good to collaborate. We split the proceeds, and they used to do all the colouring in. The book cost me 2 and 6. They used to colour it in. I used to get it put into a frame in 49 paintings, and then I'd go all around the doors of the posh parts of Bristol flogging the paintings individually. I thought this fluid would be a good additional line, you see. I thought I can sell this to the housewives for the fluid. And then so that's where that started, and it worked. And it's in the end, he said, no, I'm not going to give you the pay, forget it. So what I did, I thought, I've got to know more about America. I don't know anything. So I went to the library and I started getting books on the States to understand where he lived and where he worked in New Jersey. I didn't know what that was all about. So I thought, I'm going to do that. So that's what I did. And but then I learnt the final thing, and that was how to preserve your capital. Because I knew this was going to cost me a lot of money ringing them all the time. And bear in mind, I had some money because I was doing these jobs. So it was a childlike money. It wasn't any... And I didn't thought, I can't afford this every week, keep flogging that. By then, I'd got a German Shepherd, and my parents couldn't afford to feed the dog, so I had to. So I used to look after him and have to pay all the bills. So I needed the money I had. It was committed to my dog. It went everywhere with me. So what I did, I used to ring Barry, and Leon would tell you the same story. I used to ring Barry, and always at 11 American time, whenever I wanted to ring him. And the reason I did, I used to ring, and they'd say, oh, hi Steve, how are you doing? And I'd say, yes, I'm fine. And they'd say, is Barry there? I'd say, and they'd say, the girl would always say, oh, you always ring at the wrong time. He's out in the yard having a fag, having a cigarette and a coffee. And I used to say, oh, that's a nuisance. Can you get him to ring me back? Sure. And so my capital went a lot further, you see. But then I had another problem. How do I keep the phone box free? So what I did, I thought, this is great. Well, my dad was a French polisher, and his job involved having masking tape. So I used to get a roll of his masking tape and a bit of cardboard, and I used to put out of order on it, and then I'd tape the phone box. And Joyce had told me that you can receive a phone call into a phone box. I didn't realize that. And so I used to put the masking tape around the phone box, and then I would sit on a stool in the rain, because it rains a lot in England, and certainly in Bristol, and I would sit there with this umbrella and wait for the phone to ring, because I'd ring, and it was always that sort of time. And people would come along, and there was one old dear that used to come along often when I was sat there, and she'd say, oh, hello, my love. You know, what are you doing? Still broken down, is it? And I'd say, yeah, still broken. Oh, give me a shout, would you? I'd say, yeah, of course I will. I'll give you a shout when the repair bloke comes. And I would sit there, phone would ring, I'd run around the door, rip the masking tape off and say, good afternoon, Easy Clean. And that was where Easy Clean came from. Before then, there was no Easy Clean. I never even thought of the name. I thought, oh, blimey, I'll pick the phone up. What do I say? And I just said Easy Clean. I don't know why. And that's where it started. And in the end, I got the thing, and I started flogging it for cleaning fluid to the big boys, and eventually I grew the business. And then when I was 19, I sold that business, and I went into property. And that's what I'm boring you with today, so that's it. So I've only got 20 minutes, so I better leave. Thanks anyway.